On behalf of the Icelandic chairmanship of the Arctic Council, I am pleased to welcome you to the second Arctic Resilience Forum. The past few months have tested and tried our own personal resilience, as we have all had to adapt quickly to a radical worldwide change. This impressive webinar series of 10 sessions clearly demonstrates human adaptability. Many of us are now proficient users of a number of web-based meeting platforms we had never even heard of pre-COVID, and we have learned to enjoy virtual traveling or not. We had hoped to host this event on site in Iceland this fall, in a village on the East Coast that has a long history of adapting to natural conditions, whether it was sea ice crushing the docks in winter, avalanches threatening the settlement itself, or landslides in summer. I won't have the opportunity to welcome you there this time, but perhaps Iceland will be lucky enough to host an in-person Arctic Resilience Forum at a later date. The origins of the forum can be traced back to when the Arctic Resilience Action Framework was adopted by Arctic Council ministers in May 2017. Ministers acknowledged the framework's importance as a means to track priorities and coordinate work undertaken to support resilience of communities and ecosystems in the circumpolar region. This is the background to the successful delivery of the first Arctic Resilience Forum held in Rovaniemi in 2018 during the Finnish chairmanship of the Arctic Council. The Rovaniemi event offered an important opportunity for experts and officials throughout the Arctic to discuss ongoing resilience-related activities and to share experiences and best practices from the regions and sectors. We have learned over the past several months that the pandemic serves to emphasize the unique strengths of the Arctic communities, but also their vulnerabilities. I think that rings true elsewhere as well. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown the whole world in at the deep end. Yes, it is a hard wake-up call, but we can also call it a critical opportunity to continue and enhance our efforts to improve resilience, not only in the Arctic region. Iceland welcomes the chance to host the second Arctic Resilience Forum and the opportunity to collaborate with the SDWG and with the Arctic Initiative at the Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center. Over the next 10 weeks, we can look forward to a thoughtful and engaging discussions about a broad range of topics, providing an excellent venue to explore opportunities for future work to strengthen Arctic resilience and bring us a step closer to a sustainable Arctic. We hope you will join us.
The Sustainable Development Working Group of the Arctic Council is pleased to co-organize the second Arctic Resilience Forum together with our colleagues at Harvard Kennedy School's Arctic Initiative. Now more than ever, with the global impacts of COVID-19, we appreciate the importance of supporting the resilience of Arctic communities and ecosystems, and the value in having the Arctic Resilience Action Framework to help identify and organize our priorities. In 10 online sessions, this year's forum will explore 10 important topics that reflect different facets of Arctic resilience, including Indigenous Youth Leadership, food security, renewable energy, human health and pandemics, broadband connectivity, gender, socio-ecological resilience, infrastructure, and indigenous knowledge systems. Each of these topics will have its own dedicated session to discuss relevant best practices, tools, and policies. These sessions will be interactive and will consider opportunities for future work to support and improve resilience. We recognize that some of these topics stand alone. Therefore, each session will also discuss interconnections between the different topics and emphasize the need to advance work in multiple areas at once in a coordinated manner in order to enhance the resilience of the circumpolar Arctic region. The results of this year's Arctic Resilience Forum will be presented to the members of the Sustainable Development Working Group at our meeting in February 2021. We will also provide a summary report to the senior Arctic officials and our colleagues in the other working groups of the Arctic Council. It is our hope that the discussions that take place during the Arctic Resilience Forum sessions will inform future projects and initiatives of the Arctic Council for the benefit of the Arctic communities. We look very much forward to a lively discussion and welcome your participations in the sessions. I wish you all a good luck with all the sessions, and I hope you will have a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first session of the Arctic Resilience Forum. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Elenzara Turi, who's the chair of the board of the Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat and a board member of the Sámi Council, who'd like to say some opening words. Thank you, Elenzara.
Thank you very much. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, dear Indigenous friends, representatives of Arctic Indigenous peoples, organizations and institutions, representatives of the Arctic Council and Arctic Council's Icelandic chairmanship, dear Arctic friends. On behalf of the Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat, it's a great honor for me to bid you welcome to this session on Indigenous Youth Leadership, the very first session of the Arctic Resilience Forum series. The Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat, we have had the pleasure of contributing to this event, particularly by working together with Arctic Indigenous Youth. I believe that today is a unique opportunity for us to learn from the perspectives and knowledge of Arctic Indigenous youth leaders. I particularly find it very exciting and promising that our Arctic Indigenous youth leaders are the very first to start off in the Arctic Resilience Forum series. I believe that their stepping up to the challenge bears witness to their resilience and strength. I also heard that earlier today that there were around 200 registered participants to this event, coming from all over the world. I believe this shows that youth matter. It confirms the importance of Indigenous youth leaderships for building the resilience of Arctic Indigenous people through using our Indigenous traditional knowledge. I particularly look forward to hear the Arctic Lavvu Dialogue today with Indigenous youth leaders from all around the circumpolar Arctic, from Alaska, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, and Russia. We will hear about challenges and crises they are facing and hear what they need to step up to take leadership and also capture new opportunities for their future. And I believe that this will give us a unique opportunity to learn more about what resilience means in the Arctic Indigenous context. So without further ado, I wish us all good luck and I look forward to our discussions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Before we continue on and I introduce you to a number of colleagues, I'm really excited to do. I want to just cover a few technical issues with you as we're all learning this new Zoom world. First, I want to point out that if you look at the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see that you have the option of translation, and you can pick to either be on the English channel or the Russian channel. So I encourage you now to pick your language of choice and switch onto that channel so that you can hear all of our speakers. Some will be speaking in Russian, and we hope that some participants are here who are Russian speakers and may want to hear translation from the English speakers. So that's the first thing I just wanted to point out. The other thing is you will see that we have a Q&A button down at the bottom as well. We invite you to post your questions for the Indigenous youth leaders who will be part of the panel discussion. We can't promise that we will be able to get to all of the questions that you might ask, but we can commit to reviewing those questions we don't get to after, and we will give you the opportunity to continue to the discussion in the Slack forum, which you would have received a link to when you registered. So we encourage you to both post your questions and to continue the conversation in the Slack forum when we're done. The final thing on a technical note, just before we move on, I want to highlight is, given that this is a youth focused event, that we are encouraging young people to post their questions and comments on all the themes that we're going to be covering in our sessions. And there's a social media campaign called Youth for Arctic Resilience. And you can find information about it on the Sustainable Development Working Group website. And we've also been posting on Twitter and Facebook. And we hope that you will provide your questions and comments so you can be part of every part of the conversation, and we can be informed by your questions and comments. So I'll very quickly just thank you all, and I'm very excited to launch the Arctic Resilience Forum 2020. I think now more than ever, resilience is an important topic to cover. And I just, before I hand the mic over to my colleagues who will be talking about what resilience means in this context, I just want to touch on a few things that we're really trying to achieve with this event. So first of all, one of the things that makes resilience valuable is its ability to sort of recognize and allow us to see the connections between diverse issues. And that's something that we'll be trying to do throughout this session. Today, we're talking about Indigenous youth leadership. Next week, it's food security. We're going to be talking about human health and pandemics and infrastructure. And we really hope that you will come back and be part of each of these conversations in order to see the interconnections between them. The other thing is, I think that it's important to recognize that resilience offers a unique opportunity to use a different lens for how we understand policy issues. And it really puts Arctic communities' well-being at the center. It shifts from a concept of growth and development to one where we actually focus on what are the needs and priorities of Arctic communities. I also think that it is an opportunity for us to look at the strengths of Arctic communities and the resilience that they already have and have demonstrated for many generations, and also be able to respond to the vulnerabilities that we also experience. And with that, I'm pleased to start the first session on Indigenous youth leadership. And I would like to invite my colleagues, Joel Clement from the Harvard Kennedy School, who's in the Arctic Initiative at the Belfer Center, and Anders Oskal, who's the Secretary General of the World Reindeer Herders and the Executive Director of the International Center for Reindeer Husbandry, to open us with a conversation about the idea of resilience.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jennifer, for that. And thanks for putting this in the context of the work that's been done in the past on resilience. I'm delighted to be here with Anders to chat very briefly about resilience. Anders, in a time of transformation in the Arctic, right? Nobody can go it alone. And we talk a lot about resilience as this concept. You know, you absorb crises and shocks and you bounce back. But what we often say is it's not about bouncing back. It's about taking those punches and bouncing forward so that you learn from the crisis and you avoid the punches next time. But I know the Sámi worldview has some very interesting thinking about resilience, and I wonder how you would describe it for this audience.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for introducing. We could start perhaps with the now, resilience is, of course, an alien word in our language. We would probably translate it to daukasvuota, which comes from the word daugi, which is a bow. As Sámi people were hunting with bows back in the day. But a bow has the capacity that if you bend it, when you bend it, it springs back. Now, of course, from that comes that if you bend it too much and it breaks, that's when you have what we in resilience language call a transformation. And that's when the system, in this case, the bow, loses its properties or functions. And if we think about this in the reindeer herding context, this could be, for instance, if the combined pressures of land use change and climate change does make it so that we are unable to continue the nomadic way of life, fragmenting the pastures to such a degree that the nomadism is hindered. Then our system, the nomadic reindeer herding civilization and way of life, will have to transform into something else. And so for that reason, we have to think about what makes this bow strong to begin with, but what could also make it stronger. And thus, as you say, by learning how to handle and adopt shocks, crises, and stresses to take a long gaze toward our Arctic futures.
Yeah, that's well put, Anders, because I frequently hear from people about resilience. What is this academic term that ecologists and psychologists cooked up about 40 years ago? But frankly, it's something that Indigenous people of the North have been practicing for millennia. And it's just, this is a term that Western science can understand. It's fascinating to see that interchange.
Yeah, and I think the concept itself, of course, is this yet another buzzword, another type of fancy concept that outsiders are bringing in. On the other hand, nothing is perfect, but I think resilience seems to fit at least the world of reindeerherders, in that the foundation of it is to talk about socio-ecological systems, human-coupled ecosystems, where in our case, people, our reindeer and nature is very strongly coupled. And this is manifested through our traditional indigenous knowledge, through our culture, our languages. And it is, of course, so that the world of reindeer herding is very much transdisciplinary. And therefore, the knowledge base to understand reindeer herding also needs to be transdisciplinary or holistic. And the resilience concept has well, one of the good aspects of it is that it is able to bridge these spheres, the spheres between science and reindeer herders, natural science, social science, traditional indigenous knowledge, and to put this together to find better ways into the future. And
Well, I think that's just put perfectly well, Anders, and I know we want to get to the youth voices on this session, but I will note that I also recorded a short video that we'll put up on the website to tackle some of the questions that we get about resilience. But is there anything else you wanted to add, Anders, before we flip it to the stars of the show tonight?
Well, I think we are all eager, not least me, to hear from our stars. We have 7 of them lined up, so let's not spend too much more time. But I will say this: in the future, we will need to focus on how to handle Arctic change, much more so for the Arctic Indigenous peoples and societies. And in so doing, we at World Reindeer Herders, we talk about the 3 C's: building the competence, but also the confidence and contacts of our youth, training our future Arctic leaders. And we are very happy to collaborate with the Harvard Kennedy School on this initiative. So let's continue to the main dish of the evening, please.
Sounds good. Thanks, Anders. Good chatting with you.
Thanks very much, Joel and Anders. I'd now like to, we're moving on to a presentation that is going to be given by an Evenki reindeer herder named Alona Gerasimova, and forgive me for the pronunciation of your last name, who's going to talk to us about a really exciting program that's now taking place.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I'm Alona from Yakutia Republic in Russia. I'm Evenki. Evenki is indigenous minority living in Siberia who traditionally practice reindeer husbandry and hunting. And I am from reindeer herding family. Today, I'm presenting you a project called Simulation of Leadership Through Crisis. The case for this simulation is the global health crisis of our time and the greatest challenge we have faced in years, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were wondering, is there a way to train indigenous youth to efficiently manage a crisis? Can a pandemic be used as an educational tool? This simulation uses a method of role-playing and interactive game design to help answer these very questions. This project we designed together with Sunaina, a student from the Harvard Kennedy School. So what is this? Simply, it is a game for young indigenous people from the circumpolar north. There are roles and participants get points as a team. This game will take place during the leadership seminar for Arctic Indigenous Youth Leaders in January next year, and it will go through Zoom. So we invite young indigenous people to take part and apply for the seminar. The participants of the seminar will be divided into teams of 5-6 people to play the simulation, and each person is going to play a role. So the simulated background is this. The whole story happens in indigenous village far away in the Arctic, and global COVID pandemic happens. So the village faces this challenge as well as the rest of the world. So imagine what you as a leader in this village are going to do. In this game, participants are presented the opportunity to make choices as decision makers and community leaders and execute their COVID response in this simulated setting. The themes for the game include food security, healthcare, traditional knowledge preservation, and governance challenges. During the seminar in January, we will have 1 hour per day to play the simulation. So participants also will have time between the session to prepare. Teams will get points for their decisions. There are also other tasks to get extra points. You can expect some incredible events and unpredictable events, and of course there's a matter of luck. And Arctic experts and indigenous leaders would be judges and mentors in this. So we want to try and make this simulation a fun and interesting exercise for you, where you can also sharpen your negotiation and communication skills. And we want to teach you to take decisions under crisis, and we want to see how this may look like through a game. And the teams with most points wins this friendly competition. So we hope that this gamified approach provides a creative way for indigenous youth to become more resilient for the future. Apply for the seminar, and we hope to see you in January. Thank you. Now I give the floor to the leader of UArctic Elat Institute, Professor Svein Mathisen. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. Just 2 seconds. The host stops me. Could you hear me? Could I talk?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, Alana. I think most of it said. All of you, I think it's not 200 people, but more than 300 people registered for this event. All of the youth come to our seminar in January. It has the name of Professor McCarthy from Harvard. The reason is that Association of World Reindeer Herders more than 20 years ago started to work with Professor McCarthy about the Arctic climatic impact assessment. He dedicated some part of his science to the Arctic, and 20 years ago, actually, he allowed reindeer herders and indigenous people of the Arctic to be included in an Arctic Council assessment, Arctic climatic impact assessment. That's unfortunately, Professor McCarthy, he died just before Christmas last year. And in honor of him, we make this seminar together with the Kennedy School. We have a lot of preparation in front of us, but it's very interesting. Alana said it, it's very cool. focus on indigenous knowledge and resilience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sen. And so now we're very excited. I'm going to introduce my colleague Rosa Maranmega, who's an advisor at the Indigenous Peoples Secretariat. And she will be working with Anders Oskal, who you met just moments ago, to facilitate a Lavvu Dialogue with our Indigenous youth leaders who've agreed to join us today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So the upcoming session is called Moderated Lavvu Dialogue. And in this dialogue, there is a panel of Indigenous youth from the circumpolar Arctic. And first of all, I would like to explain what the term Lavvu means. And for those of you who don't necessarily speak Sámi, a Lavvu is a Sámi term for the traditional nomadic tent, which represents a key arena around the fire, of course, for discussions, serving to bridge different views and interests and finding solutions. And now this traditional forum and practice is brought on this online platform to bring together the youth around the Arctic and as people around the world who are participating and looking this at the moment. And for this Arctic Lavvu Dialogue, I would like to introduce our panelists who are taking part of this, the youth panel. And we start from Alaska. So first of the panelists is Darling Anderson, Ungana from Falls Pass, Alaska. And she's currently working as the Cultural Heritage Coordinator for Aleutian Pribilof Iceland Association in Anchorage, Alaska. And she's an advocate for Indigenous rights and promoting of Indigenous languages. And she's a part of the Permanent Participants Youth Network representing the Aleut International Association. And the second one, our panelist is Dinali Chase Hodgson, and she's from Anvik, Alaska. And she's the instigator of the land media and holds a degree in anthropology with an emphasis in Indigenous knowledge and public policy from Brown University. And she represents the Arctic Athabascan Council in the Permanent Participants Youth Network. Then we move on in Sápmi. The third panelist is Elenzara Sparrok. She's a South Sámi from a reindeer herding family from Hattfjelldal, central Norway. And she's studying law in the University of Tromsø and is a council member of the Association of World Reindeer Herders and also part of a youth group to Norwegian Reindeer Herding Federation. And then we have a panelist, Marta Okotetto. And Marta, she's Nenets from reindeer herding family from Yamalo Nenets Autonomous Okrug, Russia. And now she's a student at the Institute of the Peoples of the North of Herzen University. And then Olga Nikolaeva, she's an Evenki from Republic of Saha, Yakutia, Russia, and she's a chair of Youth Council of the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North. And she's a Raipan representative in the Permanent Participants Youth Network. And then two more. Back to Sápmi, Perjunen Spartapuoli is a reindeer herding family in Laivas Sámi village from Sápmi, Sweden. He's an economist and an executive board member of International Center for Reindeer Husbandry. And then Tukuminnuaq Nuchar Olsen is she's a passionate Indigenous and Indigenous rights activist, and she's working as an office and project manager for Inuit Circumpolar Council Greenland. And she's a native Greenlander Inuk who grew up in Qaanaaq, Greenland, northernmost town in Greenland. And she has completed Indigenous Peoples' Rights and Policy Program at the Columbia University and Indigenous Fellowship Program at United Nations. So that's the great group today discussing different topics on the resilience and leadership.
Normally, we would, of course, have a huge applause for this great panel. So I suggest we do it virtually.
So for starting the discussion, the regions are seeing a lot of changes, and what is done now has an impact in the distant future. And the voice of youth is important when we are talking about the future, but also in the current state. And now we would like to hear from you, youth, your perspectives and voices in the topic of resilience and leadership. So if you could go around and start from the question, what crises are close to you and your community now? If we can start with Darling.
Yeah, so some of the crises facing us in Alaska, and specifically from my people, the Unangak people from the Aleutian region, very similar to many people in the Arctic region. Climate change has impacted all of us. A lot of us youth have seen it in our lifetimes, change from what it has been, and just getting used to drastic changes as it kind of becomes more rapid. Another kind of crisis just in our Indigenous region has to do with language loss and maintaining our Indigenous languages. Another specifically with COVID happening, not being able to make as many connections with our elders and not being able to be in close contact, and the fact that our infrastructure for communication in our rural villages is really lacking in Alaska, and I'm sure for a lot of other rural areas. And then another crisis we're kind of facing in Alaska and other areas around here has to do with a lot of racial injustice for Indigenous people and other people of color.
Yeah, that's a long line of challenges you describe, and I would have to say that I think a lot of the panelists, myself included, would recognize part of these. Should we continue a quick round first to see what commonalities we may have in perception of crisis? Maybe Olga, would you like to be next?
Thank you very much. Yes, I would agree that we all have common problems in our regions regarding languages, cultures, COVID, like traditional sectors of economics and stuff. So, but personally, also I would like to say that also in my region, probably in every Arctic region, there should be a voice for young leaders, because the only people are going to live here for sure, like for 1,000 more years more. I think it's our people, and if our voice will be heard in our government and other structures, like governmental structures and others, so it would be a great solution for our future generation to save our nature and our cultures. So that's what I think.
Most interesting. Should we try to hear what Tuku has to say about crisis?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem right now in Greenland is suicide, and suicide is always amongst youth. I think that is the biggest crisis that we can mention in Greenland, and that also have something to do with the identity crisis. Youth is many times having identity crisis, sometimes maybe because of education. Education is not really adapted to Indigenous youth. And also there is maybe because of that, could be because of that, that there is a lot of dropout in education level. And besides that, there is also language and the Indigenous knowledge disappearing. Regarding languages, Greenlandic language is seen as a strong language, but besides the West Greenlandic language, there is also many dialects, especially where I'm coming from, Qaanaaq. It's considered as a main dialect, but it's very different from the West Greenlandic language. And that because no one is teaching about this language, it is disappearing together with Indigenous knowledge, and that's also including hunting traditions. So at ICC, we are very happy that UN Indigenous Language Decade is gonna be coming from 22 to 32.
Thank you for sharing. This is substantial. Could we perhaps go to Sámi now, to Elenzara Perspectives?
Hello, thank you. In Sámi, and especially in this winter, we had a very huge crisis. We have seen the climate changes very hard, and this winter it has been a very big problem. The reindeer herding in Norway had a big grazing crisis. There was a lot of snow, locked. The reindeer's food was locked by ice, and it was a very, very long winter. And the needing of areas is going. Reindeer herding have been in the nature for many hundred years without leaving any marks, and it can live of the nature. There have always been some tough years for the reindeer herding, some harder, but the nature could recover itself because there was land of it. But now there is different because of the fragmentation of the landscape. There is other interested in the nature, like they want to build windmills, for example, and minings in the nature. And the importance of have a whole area and is very important. The knowledge about the nature and about the is if we had all this, the knowledge, I think there will be a bit less of a crisis if we have all these areas.
So you would be able to buffer more the consequences of extreme climate events if you had more areas. That's what you said.
Yes, exactly. And this we also can see in the United Nations Climate Panel also said this, that in the report it says, and I can quote, protection of grazing land will be the most important adaptive strategy for reindeer herders under climate changes, end of quote. So here we also can find it. that the needing of the areas is important.
Perhaps we should now take a jump back over the big ocean to Alaska. Denali, would you share?
Yes, Adet. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and Hajrikadistan as well for hosting this panel on resilience, particularly featuring the voices of the youth. In Alaska, as much, I agree with everything that Darling said, and right now everything seems heightened under the current political situation that is happening in the United States. We are facing an election, and so I think first and foremost, it is important to recognize that as an Indigenous person who is looking forward to the self-determination and sovereignty of our peoples across the circumpolar north, we also have to be advocating for our sovereignty and self-determination as a nation that declares itself as a democracy. Second, I would say that, one of the things that I've noticed this summer is what seems to be an increase in population rise. And unfortunately, I do not have the numbers right now to back this up. However, I have met multiple people through acquaintances and whatnot that have said that they have recently moved to Alaska. I think what we're seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic that is happening across the world is a strive to look towards some of these places that are known as the last frontier. What I can see population rise leading to is really inequitable infrastructure development. What we are seeing right now in places such as urban centers like Anchorage and Fairbanks is an increase in houselessness, which is more proportionately affecting Indigenous populations and people of color. What also happens when we have an increase in population or a demand for increased land use for possible housing developments or transportation routes is that we also see increased pressures on our land and animals, which also impacts us as Indigenous people who rely on those places and our non-human kin in order to survive and practice our traditional means of life. These are also known as resources under the state of Alaska, and I think it's important that we do call attention to how we are recognizing these resources really truly as land which has a spirit, and our animals and plants that have spirit as well. And so ultimately we have a crisis of increased pressures on our land systems, on our animals, which will ultimately lead to, I guess, loss of cultural identity, much like Olga and many of the other Indigenous youth across the Arctic have said. So, Dogaden.
Very interesting, thank you. Perhaps we now can take a turn to Western Siberia, and Marta, could you tell us what are perceived crisis in your region?
Всем добрый вечер. Спасибо за панельную дискуссию. Многие отмечают изменение климата. Это меня тоже очень беспокоит. Изменение климата, мне кажется, напрямую связано с нами, с оленеводством, с нашими пастбищными местами, то, как мы можем передвигаться на наших местах, на наших пастбищах. Мы замечаем, что год от года наша зима становится все более теплее. И вместе с этим нам приходится оленеводам пересекать такую большую реку, как Обь. И есть места, где оленеводы, собственно, переходят эту реку. И я опасаюсь то, что с изменением климата, то, что мы не сможем переходить на наши зимние пастбища. И это становится небезопасным. И как бы, чтобы сохранить наше пастбище, как-то нужно, чтобы мы как бы приспособились, чтобы мы смогли переходить на наши зимние пастбища, искать новые пути, может быть, применять какие-то новые технические средства, чтобы мы могли пасть на наши зимние пастбища. Вот. Также меня беспокоят проблемы, связанные с отношением промышленных компаний по отношению к нашим землям, к нашей Арктике. То, что сейчас везде, ну, во многих местах в Сибири отмечается то, что происходит загрязнение нашей окружающей среды, то, что где-то возникает утечка нефти, то, что загрязняются наши водные ресурсы, земли в том числе. Это такие прям глобальные вопросы, такие связанные с изменением, с экологичной безопасностью в Арктике. Спасибо.
Yes, very good. I think the last one, if I'm not mistaken, Jonas, could we hear your perspectives?
Yeah, of course. Well, my perspectives are from the Swedish side, so they are very similar to Elenzara, what she said, and also to some part what Marta said. And I would say that this is not maybe a crisis per se, but there's definitely a potential for it to become a crisis. And I'm talking about the winter season. And as Elenzara said, last winter was extreme in every way. But the thing is, we are seeing this type of extreme weather conditions every year. So for example, rain and the snow, which limits or locks the availability to ground lichen, which is the main source of pasture to the reindeer during the winter. So previously, reindeer herding communities in Sweden has been more able to mitigate some of the effects of climate change by flexible land use. But now the adaptive capacity is increasingly hampered by competing industrial land use. So I'm talking about iron ore mines, for example, logging, wind power station, etc. So the climate change and the extreme weather events during the winter is an unavoidable crisis and creates a lot of anxiety and, in the end, depression among reindeer herding youth, I would say. So I can just make an example, like for the last 7 years, my reindeer herding community has cooperated with scientists from Stockholm University, so to identify what the impact of the climate is when it's warming up and how the reindeer husbandry is responding. And what we can see from those results while collecting the data on, for example, air temperature and snow depth on grazing lands, is that when the reindeer is most sensitive to exhausting events between December and February, most of the extreme weather events occur. And the air temperature is very or extremely volatile, would change it to be encountered at as large as 40 degrees Celsius on one day to another. So these are huge problems that we are facing. And the question is, how can we solve them? Is there a way to solve them? Or are we, in a sense, do we have to adapt to them? We might have to realize that we have to adapt to it rather than having a solution to it.
That, I think, is a good round of this first round of comments from the panel. How can we relate to this. How can we handle these changes, these challenges, both themselves, but also in combination? Because as we can see, much of what you have been describing happens at the same time. These global changes that we see are coming on top of every other challenge and that our indigenous communities might be facing. So that is a good question, how to handle this. Could you comment a little bit how you try to work in this in your community, in your organizations, and particularly could you something about to what extent you use traditional indigenous knowledge in finding these solutions? Anyone care to try to start at least? I see the panel is thinking. That's good.
Excuse me, could you repeat please the question? Like,
yeah. Yes. So the question is, so we've heard now from the whole circumpolar Arctic a wide range of challenges, crises that puts our communities, our peoples in difficult positions. How have you tried to solve these issues locally? Can you name some examples how you work towards solving these issues, finding solutions, and how do you have some examples how you use traditional indigenous knowledge for finding solutions?
Okay, I can start. At ICC, as I mentioned shortly in the first question, suicide is a huge problem in Greenland, and that's why ICC is also a co-host to this Arctic Council initiative called first it was called Create, and now it's called Local to Global, which is a suicide prevention initiative in the Arctic for youth, from youth to youth. We have been showing these videos that we have been able to make in different schools, and hoping that they will gain more confidence, because suicide is such a huge taboo, and with showing that other youth is able to talk about this, then they are opening up. So we are trying to create this circle, like traditional circle that we usually would be talking about problems traditionally, to like recreate that in modern way, show videos for the youth to talk about these different issues that they are facing.
Thank you. I know that one of the panelists have been working with some of the issues on mental health. Per-Jonas, would you care to comment a little bit?
Can you say it again? Sorry.
Yeah, could you comment a little bit? I know you have some experience working in the youth organization with the issue of mental health.
Yeah.
From Swedish Sámi perspective, perhaps you could comment.
Yeah, well, from a Sami's or a Swedish perspective, I mean, mental health issue is among especially young men and reindeer herding men is poorer if you compare to the majority population. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression coming up, and there might be also some kind of taboo about talking about these type of problems that they are facing. And one of the things that my organization, when I was the chair of the Sámi youth organization in Sámi Nuora, a few years ago, what we did was to first of all highlight the problem and starting to talk about it. That was actually the first step, to just highlight it and telling everyone that it exists and it's in some way okay to have those feelings. And the next step that we did was to make sure that the majority community also knew that we have problems and we have to deal with them, and we have to have help to deal with them. So there are not institutions, but medical care that can relate to the cultural understanding. So the last years when I was chair, we worked a lot to have agreements with the medical care to make sure that there's Sámi culture perspective among those psychiatrists, psychologists is existing, so that Sámi youth can look for help.
Yes, thank you. So the capacity building, institution building is important.
Yeah.
I am tempted to take a question. We had a question concerning the land encroachments and changed use of the areas. And the question relates to, what do you think? Should we go for having protected areas in the Arctic to preserve nature? That is a question from Siberia.
May I go ahead?
Go ahead.
So I know here in Alaska we've had several issues with introductions of the possibility of opening more mines, which is the pebble mine, in areas that we've been fighting against since I was young, and it's just you can't believe it's still like an argument, but trying to increase taking those resources from areas that we as Indigenous people have fished on and gathered from for thousands of years, as well as them opening up Anwar up in Arctic and looking at more oil drilling. I know we do have kind of two sides for some Indigenous people in Alaska, but we do see a majority of youth wanting to protect the land and preserve it for as long as possible, as we've seen a lot of the negative effects that have come from the mismanagement of our land. And like Denali had voiced, as we have more people come in and going off of resources we've used for so many years, protecting that land and making sure we have the correct management as we have for thousands of years, I think is echoed throughout most of the young people in Alaska.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on the balance between protecting and developing? Olga?
I would like to add some. Well, of course, our great mission of our peoples is to protect our lands to preserve it for our future generations. But unfortunately, the reality shows for us that it's almost impossible to stop industrial development of our regions, and our goal now is to start being more active on our lands, to be on the first rows, on protecting, for example, if industrial company is coming to your land, and you should be the first one to show up and say, okay, so here's the deal. we are going to make a treaty, for example, and there should be all like conditions that would make a minimum of damage for our environment. So our goal as indigenous peoples and also as NGO activists to be more active in such situations. But of course, our dreams would be perfect to save as it is and used to be before. But yeah, we should be in this situation more adaptive.
Okay, now we have heard different crises that have been described in different areas, but let's move forward. And next question is that, what does the leadership mean to you? Who wants to start?
Should I perhaps say something initially that leadership, what does it mean? We can spend the rest of the day discussing that. Usually it's seen as something connected to authority. But you could have a position of authority without leading. And you could also, in fact, lead without authority. If we think about the icons of leadership, such as Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, they were leading most of the time not from a position of authority, but rather without it. Besides, of course, authority has its limitations. So maybe it's more a question of what kind of leadership role one could envision, how to take lead, how to lead by asking questions, investigating and doing. And in that respect, perhaps could you tell us a little bit, do we have some special indigenous leadership practices that you would mention? What does leadership mean to you? Anyone?
Yeah. Indigenous way of leading in Greenland traditionally is very egalitarian, a flat way of, not a hierarchy, but kind of like a flat way of leading. No one is higher or lower. And I remember at some point I was asked, who's my favorite leader in my home community? And I really couldn't think of anyone with my, how to say, maybe colonized mind, where leading is very hierarchic. But that simple question made me kind of decolonize my my way of thinking in leading. In Greenland, the traditional way of leading is that you only lead in what you are good in, the best one in your community. For example, if you are good in whale hunting, then that's what you are leading in. And if you are, and when it comes to other animals like reindeer, or another one will maybe be leading. So today there is lots of maybe misunderstanding in what leadership is, and there is a lot of how do you call this, expectations to a leader, a bit like a leader should be good in a lot of in many things, but the truth is that you can be a co-leader in many things maybe that you are good in.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. Someone wants to comment or bring perspectives?
Elenzara?
Yeah.
For the first, I just want to have say something quick about the protection of the landscape. I was putting my audio on, but you couldn't hear me, so I think that I did something wrong. I just want to say quick that we see that, or from my perspective, we need protection of the land because the reindeer, especially the reindeer herding, have used these different places of the land in different times of the year. So some years you use one area harder for a longer time, and you let the other part of the land rest a little bit and build up so you can use it again. And after, if there is a winter with a lot of rain, you use the other part of the land. So it's very important to protect the landscape, because that's if we don't have any landscape, there will be a big problem for the reindeer herding. And also there's a problem then with the predators, because the predators is also going to be in the same areas as the reindeer herding, and we have a problem with the predators also. So for me, I see we need to protect the areas to, and to comment what it takes for the leadership. First, I want to say that the Sámi culture is based on knowledge, and especially the reindeer herding is a family-based industry, and you have to see everything. The reindeer herd, the knowledge, you get the knowledge. You can't find any knowledge from the reindeer herding on YouTube or on Google. You need to be out there to get all the learning from how to use the landscape, from how to take care of the reindeers, where to find the reindeers, and this knowledge you get to be out there working with the reindeers. And in the Sámi we have a SIDA system, and then it's natural that the person that is out there taking care of the SIDA and the reindeer is the leader for the reindeers. And then you have leaders for this different part, because there is a family-based industry with slaughtering. You have another leader there that is taking care of the slaughtering, and so the knowledge, the elders is kind of a leader, because you need all this knowledge from all these years that you're learning when you're out working with the reindeers and seeing everything. You have it like a leader, but it's also important that the youth, we are learning and getting all this knowledge from the elders. Yeah.
Good. Anyone else to comment on leadership?
Yeah, this is Denali, and we had a request to say what region we are from, and speaking of, and I'm from the Bristol Bay and Yukon region. So one of the other questions was, when should a young leader step up during the leadership of elders? And this has been something that's been on my mind a lot this summer, especially since the Arctic Youth Leader Summit last November in Rovaniemi. It seems like we, right now we are in this flux of modernization, as well as the resurgence or renaissance, if you want to call it, of really practicing our Indigenous ways of life, at least here in Alaska. And as we go about reclaiming and reasserting our indigeneity as youth and young people, it's so important that we are having we are having mentorship, and we are turning around and being those mentors to young people that are coming up behind us as well, whether they are in, they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. I think it really encompasses the, a familial system. One of the things that always comes to mind is the fact that there's a difference between, and I can't remember who said it, and I feel terrible for that, but there's a difference between old people and elders. And one of the things that I've been understanding more and more is that elders are, they're the ones that have tapped into some sort of deeper knowing and know when to listen and then know when to really say something. And so I think leadership really is the ability to listen and to step up when you're being asked to step into something, and then also knowing when to step back. And I think that holds true for people across age groups. And so how do we recognize our traditional mentorship roles, whether that is moving from a youth into a more auntie position, into a more mother and grandmother position for people that are, that are gendered as women. And really recognizing those traditional roles. So,
we also had another question as to what it would take for you to step up to be a leader, or if you are a leader, what made you do that step? From what I could assess, hearing what you talked about when we talked about Crisis, you all were very passionate about the challenges and problems you described. So perhaps it's more convenient, looking at the clock, to have you say something about what stopped you from being a leader. Who do you have to ask to be a leader? And perhaps finally, what action points would you like to see to have us work on leadership and provide something for you in that respect? So what prevents you from being a leader, and what is the action you would like to see? Okay, nothing prevents you from being leaders. That's very good. Darling, please.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that I think we have a lot more opportunities nowadays. Within the last 5-10 years, it's become a lot more obvious people that the youth do have, we're here, we can see what's happening, and we have a different perspective that is viable to be used on different platforms and in leadership roles. And the fact that we have a lot more representation, a lot of more young women are stepping up to these plates, and being able to see other people like you in leadership roles is really welcoming. And having role opportunities like these just that specifically say youth and give people that time to, let people see who they are and then even move on up from there, I think has made a difference in the past few years to see like a resurgence in youth, and also just with us being able to connect across the globe and see how we're all able to have these similarities and see how we can connect with each other. I think in the past could have been a hindrance, and since we weren't able to, but now that we can, has really promoted the leadership roles that we're able to step into.
Very good. I'll take one last comment. I see Jennifer is appearing on the screen. I was wondering if perhaps Marta, would you like to say something? What should you do from here?
Я хотела прокомментировать про лидеров наших общинах, то, что в тундре, когда, собственно, кочуют наши оленеводы, всегда как бы есть такой один человек, лидер, который знает, когда перемещаться, какой день нужно, например, перекочевать на новое место, знает элементарно даже какая погода завтра будет, знает пастбищные места, все знает, как бы все прислушиваются к его мнению, и как бы лидер просто как бы слушает их советы и потом как бы делает какие-то выводы и ведет сообщество вперед, как бы. Часто, как бы я сейчас подумала, как бы лидер в традиционных наших сообществах и лидер как бы в нашем как бы современном мире, где мы сейчас находимся, например, я учусь в Санкт-Петербурге, и как бы лидер в тундре и лидер в таком мегаполисе немножко как бы сказать то, что лидер в тундре не является лидером как бы в городе для городских жителей. Потому что они как бы городское сообщество, мне кажется, во многом не очень понимает наших коренных лидеров. Вот. В городском пространстве как бы лидерства как бы, у нас есть молодежные отделения, молодежные ячейки наших коренных народов, и как бы там есть лидеры, и мы прислушиваемся как бы под их началом реализуются какие-то проекты. Как бы, да, и вот, я потом, может быть, продолжу свои мысли, как бы потом позже сформулирую еще. Спасибо.
If you have an extremely short comment to go, we will take it.
Yay. I think first of all, role models that Indigenous youth can reflect themselves in is very important. Also, the earlier the youth learns that they are important and needed in the society, the more I think they will be engaged also in future. In Greenland, there is a lot of waiting culture right now. In Greenland, we wait for someone to step up and do something. And this is because we are taught that way in society today. Before the colonization, there was roles for everyone in the society. Like even the kids would be helping at home, like getting ice for water or to the river in summer times. It's all small things, but they're all important and all needed. And another thing I have been hearing from youth here in Greenland is that they don't necessarily want to be in an organization in order to be engaged in youth work. Here in Greenland, for example, there is not many youth organizations. And when there are youth organizations, then they are most likely political, linked to a political party. And youth wants a space where they can talk about issues without a political party background, so they can speak freely and open and without have to disagree with others because of politics. So I recommend not only to reach out to youth organizations when youth voice is needed, but also individuals in order to give better youth voices. Thank you.
Yes, that was not extremely short, but it was very comprehensive, very good points there. I think a wonderful round off of this part of the program. I see Jennifer is not too angry with me for that.
I'm smiling, but I am here with the hook.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to all of you for all of your thoughtful comments. I'm almost disappointed that we don't have more time because, and I do struggle, as I'm sure all of us are, with the format, because as Anders said at the beginning, we should all be clapping and you should be getting that kind of interactive feedback, and this isn't the best format for this, but I can tell you that your words are amazing, and I absolutely look forward to hearing more from all of you. And I hope that you'll join us again for other sessions. With this, I would like to hand the floor to Jordan Peterson. He is with Gwich'in Council International, and he's the former Deputy Grand Chief of Gwich'in Tribal Council. And Jordan is going to be joining us, and he's going to reflect on Indigenous youth leadership and empowering the next generation of leaders for success in a rapidly changing Arctic. Jordan?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. And just want to say thank you to all of the youth panelists. It was really great to listen to you and to hear all of your amazing insights. First of all, I think what I would like to start off with in trying to identify, I think, how to close out this amazing forum and the amazing discussions that we've had so far, is that as organizations and within our nations, within our governments, it is integral that we hold our youth to the same regard that we do our elders. I think from, you know, one of the speakers earlier, one of the youth, and this definition of what an elder is and what an older person is a challenge, I think, that our nations have been pressed up against in the last 150 years, primarily around the arrival of European settlers within the north of Canada. I truly believe that it is a sacred honor and a duty to support the next generation, and that we all must ask ourselves if we are fulfilling the extent of this duty. Some of the things that the Gwich'in Tribal Council has done, and Jennifer explained a bit about my background. Just a month ago, the Gwich'in Tribal Council had an election that I did not run in, but I spent the last 4 years as the Deputy Grand Chief, elected at 29 years old. I'm currently 33, and before that I worked with youth for the Gwich'in Tribal Council. I had decided that I wanted to move home. I was living in Alberta and had the opportunity to be able to come back to Inuvik to participate in a self-government forum that the Gwich'in Tribal Council held in 2013, in September 2013. And the following weeks and months, I had contacted the leadership of the Gwich'in Tribal Council at the time every week to tell them that I wanted to come home and that I wanted to work for the Gwich'in Tribal Council, and that primarily I wanted to work with the young people. And the reason is because every election, whether it be within my nation or the territorial election or the federal election or any other Indigenous nation, too often we hear that they're doing it for the next generation or that they're doing it for the youth. And as soon as, you know, not everyone, but the majority, I believe, actually don't fulfill that promise and that responsibility. So I wanted to come home and not necessarily just give youth a voice, but a voice that is listened to. So one of the really, really amazing things that the Gwich'in Tribal Council has done is that we started a regional youth council, and we had 15 youth come together, and they built out their own terms of reference. I had nothing to do with it except support them, as well as the leadership of the GTC at the time. I had nothing to do with it except provide an opportunity and a space and to fund discussions so that they can say what it was that they wanted to do. And that was really integral, I think, to me stepping up into leadership. But most importantly, that every youth project that the Gwich'in Tribal Council does over the last 6 years and moving forward has to go through this youth council for their okay, for their approval. And that no youth should, you know, wait for permission to step up. that message, I think, when you compound it within every nation, if that was the message that we all said, that the current leaders say, and that our elders and our knowledge holders are taking up that mantle of mentorship, of being a mentor, is when I really think that we will make that significant change that I think that we're all speaking about today around resiliency and the challenge of the loss of cultural identity. That piece of cultural identity that's been lost, that's been stripped from us, that's been taken and stolen, is the foundation for which all of the youth leaders that spoke today, for myself and for future generations, and for all of the knowledge holders in our communities, need to ensure that we are building a strong foundation and building the systems and as well as the opportunities for young people to be able to engage in who they are. If I go back to December 2nd, 2013, my first day working for Gwich'in Tribal Council, after asking the leadership at the time every week that I wanted to come home, they got sick of me and asked me to write an essay on what I would do and why. 2,000 word essay. I wrote that the next day. They called me and asked me how soon could I start. So I started December 2nd, and my first week at the GTC, and this is the only time that it's ever happened, other than this happening with the youth council, is that I had a week of cultural orientation with a very well respected elder, Sarah Jerome, who is a former language commissioner for the Northwest Territories, principal, teacher, amazing elder, knowledge holder. And the first question she asked me is, what does it mean to be proud to be Gwich'in? And that's a term that our entire nation uses, from Alaska to the Yukon to the Northwest Territories. And I didn't have an answer, but it sparked within me the ability to really begin challenging myself and questioning myself in terms of what my cultural identity is. And that answer to that question is not going to be the same for every Gwich'in. Everyone's within their own space and timeline in terms of that revitalization, of that resurgence of who we are as Indigenous people, and that resurgence of cultural identity. The opportunities for language, the opportunities for cultural programming, the resurgence and revitalization of moose hide tanning and caribou hide tanning, the importance of building that gap with young people and our elders, our true elders, is one of the most integral things that we all need to support within the Arctic Council family, within any of the observer states, within the permanent participants of the Arctic Council, and the amazing supporters like Jennifer Spence and the work that she does within the SDWG and the many other working groups, is that how do you answer that question, whether you're Indigenous or not? Do you know where your family comes from? Do you know your cultural identity? Do you know your family's history in terms of the oppressive nature of colonialism within the world? And it's not necessarily something to be ashamed of. It's something that you need to understand to really move forward on this term that primarily the federal government of Canada, has been using, of reconciliation. Reconciliation isn't a one-way street. Reconciliation isn't just for the European settlers within the country state to reconcile with Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples need to also reconcile with European settlers and the rest of the Canadian population. But most importantly, we need to reconcile within our own communities. We need to tear down the walls of oppression. We need to tear down the walls of power, and we need to take a more holistic approach to the way that we governed ourselves for millennia. And ways that we can do that is by protecting places like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and standing up against an oppressive Trump government in terms of what they've been trying to do within the calving grounds of the porcupine caribou, or the wind turbines in Scandinavia, and how that has been impacting Sámi. I think, just as an example, being able to lead and being able to promote and support the cultural revitalization of our people is important. Because when you look at the history of the Gwich'in, it's been one of warriors, it's been one of survival, empowerment. We live in one of the most harshest climates in the world, and our nation thrived. We didn't just survive. So with that, I leave with a question that I hope that each of you that are listening, Indigenous or not, Irish, Scottish, whatever it may be, to ask yourself, what does it mean to be proud to be Gwich'in, but in your own cultural identity? Merci.
Oh, thank you so much, Jordan, for putting this all in such perfect context and asking just the right question for us to finish with. Very much appreciate that. My job is to take it all home here and tell you all what's coming up next. But first, I do want to say, I think as adult leaders, it's time for us to stop being so surprised when we get such thoughtful and engaged and helpful feedback and input from youth, and particularly Indigenous youth voices. And I think in the interest of building Arctic resilience, it is imperative that we find ways to clear the path for these younger leaders to get to the decision table. So thank you so much to all the panelists and everyone that's been involved in organizing this session. I'm overwhelmed not just by what we heard, but all the questions that were being asked were very insightful. I will say, don't stop asking questions. There's an entire conversation going on now on the Slack channel that was set up to follow up on this session. So when you registered, you were given an option to go in there. So sign up for Slack, get in there, and keep this conversation going. There's a lot to be recorded. I will say that we've taken notes for the whole session. We're recording this session, but also we are planning to develop a document after each of these sessions that will summarize recommendations, advice, feedback, and next steps as our panelists have put them forward. And we'll be doing that for each session, and then ultimately, all 10 sessions, those documents will be rolled up into some final findings about building resilience and where we are on resilience in the Arctic. We hope actually to have a session early next year to summarize all of these findings. And it came up yesterday that maybe we could bookend this whole episode with youth by having the youth moderate that session once again. So a lot coming up on the youth engagement side. I will say we have next week the food security session at this very same time. So please register either for that or just go ahead and register for all the sessions. They're going to be fantastic, and you'll get a prompt before each session. Let's see, and I think we'll be able to capture all of the questions that have been recorded, and we're going to have a lot of material to work with, and we really appreciate having, holy cow, a ton of participants. If we'd done this in person, we wouldn't have been able to reach as many people. So things are really working out. Notice in the chat, you can see that Brittany posted the registration for the food security session, which is next week. But do stay tuned in the Slack channel for this session, and there's a general Slack channel for all the sessions so you can stay engaged. Sorry we've gone a little bit over time, but holy cow, what a fantastic session to start with. Thanks to everybody who organized it, and we'll see you all next week.